Good morning, everyone. My name is Cole Woodman. I am the chairman of the Veterans in Business Network, or VIB Network for short. For those of you who know us, we are a nonprofit that tries to help out veteran business owners succeed in the marketplace. For those who do already know us, familiar, been to our conferences, please continue to follow, sign up, etc. to all of our social media. We're going to go ahead and move right into today's presentation. But first, I'm going to do a quick intro on a few things that I would be remiss if I didn't mention. Please, if you haven't already, sign up for our network directory. It's absolutely free, doesn't cost you anything. We have corporations, government agencies reaching out to us to help them find veteran companies, and that's the first place we look is our directory. Again, free, doesn't cost you anything but a few minutes of your time. Watch out for future webinars. We had a great sign up for this one. Looks like we're closely approaching 100 people online right now for this one, so good deal. Absolutely good information. Also sign up for our newsletter. We send a weekly newsletter. It has networking opportunities, outreach events, solicitations that are upcoming or that are already posted. We'll also be doing a couple more events later this year. One of them is certification success outreach. This summer, we're still working out the details, but to try and help businesses get certified and find out, you know, once you get certified, now what do I do with my certification? How can I go find those contracts and win them? And finally, our second annual national conference, November 5th and 6th in Los Angeles. For those that attended last year, our speaker today was one of our presenters. Absolutely great information, great speaker, you know, and those are the type of things we try to bring to our conference. A little bit more information. It'll be 2 full days, November 5th and 6th, as we mentioned, in Los Angeles. We'll have networking, roundtable discussions. There will be a reception. It'll be at the Biltmore Millennium Hotel. They've got plenty of room, plenty of breakout space. We'll have lots of networking, and we hope that you can join us in November. So without further ado, I'll introduce today's speaker. Keith Wichmann, is the president and founder of HurtVet Subcontracting. He, like many of you, is a veteran. He's a business owner. He graduated from the Naval Academy in 1989 with a degree in aerospace engineering, was an aviator. I was a surface guy in the Navy, so I wore black shoes. He wore his brown shoes. After his naval career, he flew night freight for a major airline for another 10 years. And after 20 years of flying, decided to step into the commercial world as director of operations for an industrial contractor. And then after a couple more years, decided that he would start his own business, caught the entrepreneurial bug, and started HurtVet Subcontracting. And so he's been highly successful, probably also made a few mistakes that I'm sure you'll learn about today. That's the purpose of this webinar, learn from other people's errors or mistakes and from their successes. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Keith, and he will start his presentation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Cole. We have made a lot of mistakes. So hopefully I can save you guys some time and make you guys a little extra money so you can learn from our mistakes. I firmly believe that now is one of the greatest times in history to be a SDVOSB or a VSOB. As you can see from the chart to the right, that is our actual revenue chart. You can see it's almost exponential. We've been very blessed in the last few years, and all those opportunities are available to you also. As most of you know, the United States government is the largest customer in the world. 25 cents of every dollar in the United States is spent by the federal government. One of the great opportunities is through the VA, and if you have probably heard of the VA Veterans First Policy and the Rule of Two, which essentially says that the VA will award contracts to service-disabled companies if there are at least 2 that are interested and the pricing is fair and reasonable. Back in summer of 2016, we had the Kingdomware Supreme Court ruling, which essentially just added kerosene to the fire. It's acted as a true turbocharger, and the VA now has doubled down on its efforts to source to service-disabled and veteran-owned small businesses. And finally, I also want to quickly mention there is a law out there, Public Law 109-461, that gives contracting officers the ability to sole source to service-disabled companies, up to $3 million for regular contracts and $5 million for manufacturing. Ironically, in my experience, the VA has used this mechanism very little. We have had other agencies such as Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. Navy and the FAA use this public law. So it is available through the VA, but in our experience, for some reason, it's other agencies that are using it a little bit more. I encourage you to bring value to the VA and to the other agencies. Don't be caught into the stereotype that sometimes we are labeled as a service-disabled company, that we're somehow lesser. We are sitting in our pajamas, living in our parents' basement, trolling FBO for free money, mailbox money. That's not who we are, and that's who you should strive not to be. There's great opportunity out there. I'm going to emphasize over and over in this presentation that you should establish yourself as a trusted advisor to contracting officers. I'll touch on that in more detail shortly. As we go through this, just understand this is my opinion. Don't copy me, copy my techniques. There's things that we have done through trial and error that have worked and things that haven't. So if you see something that HurtVet is specifically doing, I wouldn't say copy, but find your own specialization. Specialization is the key. If you want to be a generalist and try to do everything for everybody, I don't think you're going to find much success in this. So HurtVet's motto is we try to look for projects that are hard, funky, complex, things that no one else wants to do, because that's where you're typically finding opportunity. So once again, my goal here is to save you time and hopefully make you guys a little money. We're going to share the tips and tricks that we've picked up over time, and it's because we're not smarter than you guys. We just probably made more mistakes. As we go through this presentation, just please be patient. Understand that we got beginners here and we got some seasoned pros in the audience. I'm going to move through this pretty quickly because, number one, I know your time is valuable. You're trying to run businesses. I don't want you to get bored, and we have a lot of material to cover. So what we're going to talk about is the unspoken language that contracting officers sometimes have. And the best example I can give you is a real life situation that happened to my company a little more than 12 months ago. I saw an opportunity on FBO in the New Orleans area for the VA, and they were soliciting the building and installation of 15 window screens that went on 15 clinics spread across the New Orleans area. I signed up on the interested bidders list, didn't give it another thought because it wasn't a match for us. It's not really what we do. About 4 days later, I get a call from the contracting officer, and he said, are you interested in this project? And I told him, I probably am not interested in this. It's not a good fit for us. But as I hung up the phone, I thought it was kind of odd. I usually don't get calls from contracting officers asking questions like that. So then about a week later, I get a call from the guy again. And he said, just so you know, I posted the attendance roster for the site visit on FBO. We hope you bid on the project. I hung up the phone and I thought, that is really weird. So I hopped on FBO, downloaded the attendance roster, and there was just 4 names on it. Every single name was a VA representative. What does that mean? Well, no one showed up. So I quickly found a supplier that made these screens. He happened to be in the New Orleans area. His total price out the door was $34,000. I realized there was a significant opportunity here, and it was a project I really wasn't that interested in. So my price was $34,000. So I submitted a bid to the VA for $64,000. We won. I thought that the contracting officer had been very crafty, he had been brilliant, and he had communicated to us and basically let us know that he was not getting a lot of interest in this. I think he reached out to other people, but we were the only company that listened. All right, before we get into our top 10 list, I want to cover quickly some fast facts that you guys might find useful as you're starting or managing your business. Number one, September is hunting and harvest month. The last 3 weeks of September, my entire staff literally wakes up at 5 to 6 in the morning, and we go to bed between midnight and 1 in the morning. 50% of our revenue in 2019 will come in the last 3 weeks of September. So keep watching FBO. You need to monitor it hourly as items get posted. Last year, we won a contract that was posted on the 30th of September at noon and closed on the 30th of September at 2 o'clock. So keep your eyes peeled. Team with other services-able competitors. This is counterintuitive. Many people take the approach that you're my competition, so you can't be my friend. Not always the case. You are enemies on bid day. After you win the award, you might find that your competitor might be your new teammate. The other thing, because you are similarly situated companies, if you subcontract to another SDVOSB, he is actually helping you meet your self-performance requirements. Case in point, last May, I spent $60,000 in payments to my competitors just in that month. All right, always get a debrief, even if you win. You need to find out what your strengths and weaknesses are of your proposal. It's something that people don't often do. Honestly, we need to do it more often ourselves. If there's something that you think is not right and you should have won, ask for the verbal first, because if you built rapport with that contracting officer, he or she is more likely to reveal something over the phone than they are if they do it in writing. They understand that if you're really upset, you're going to use that as evidence against you. Team with big business. The Great Recession, 2007 to 2009, basically put HurtVet into business. We teamed with very large companies like Siemens, Honeywell, Simplex Grinnell. These companies, never in their right minds prior to the Great Recession, would have teamed with a one-man show. And at that time, I was a one-man show. But because they were so hungry and desperate for business, we crafted these relationships, and they work. So don't be afraid to contact the branch manager of a large company. He might be more hungry than you think. If a contracting officer calls you to negotiate on price, it either means that you've developed a lot of rapport, they like you, and they're trying to help you get a little bit lower, or you are the only bidder. The other possibility might be that everyone busted budget. This situation happened to me last night. It also happened to me a week ago. So if a contracting officer calls you, it means that you're in the running. I've had situations where sometimes I lower my price, sometimes I don't. I've lowered my price and found out later that I was the only bidder, and that contracting officer was just haggling with me. Other times, we've been given the opportunity to lower our price a couple of times. We did not end up winning. We were not low, but the contracting officer just liked us. Okay, you can't bid against stupid. What I mean by that is if you know what the pack or what the pricing ought to be, if it's around 100 grand and you have one outlier that's at 70 and you happen to have a good idea where he is, you can't chase him. Don't bid against stupid. 80 to 90% of all best value contracts are still awarded to the low price. So keep that in mind. Just because you're bidding on best value doesn't mean you can get a 30 or 40% premium. Contracting officers don't know how to run a business. A lot of them don't understand the financial side. So when you're negotiating or talking about margins or reducing your price, don't let them bully you into going into a place that's going to be a financial loser. They don't understand the cost of flying someone out to either do a bid walk or to manage a project. They don't know that G&L insurance might cost you $5,000 to $20,000 a year. So they're not exactly, not all of them are going to be as business savvy as you. Also understand that your cost to bid on a project internally, just your time, your employees, is going to be $800 to $5,000, even if you're a tiny company. So it means you need to try to be selective. Most people are inherently salespeople. They're aggressive. They want to sell. So it's hard to say no and be selective.
Keith, one quick comment I forgot to mention. For everybody submitting questions, we're going to let Keith power through the presentation. We do have time reserved at the end for questions, so keep sending those in through the chat, and then we'll address them all at the end. Thanks.
Okay, one other, number 9. Some of these, some service-disabled companies, maybe more the pajamas, living in the basement guys, think that they can mark something up 5 or 10%. That's going to quickly put you out of business. With all the costs we just talked about, unless it's a $20 million project, if you're bidding at these super low margins, it's not going to be a good outcome over the long term. Typically, I think you're going to need to be in the 20% markup just to be break even, and then higher if you want to actually make money. And in this case, we're talking about markup, not margin. I have a general rule of thumb in business, and that is if you take the number of employees a company has, multiplied by 125,000, their revenue needs to be around that number. It's kind of a life or death magic number. The only deviation from that rule of thumb is if you have a lot of minimum wage people, it might be a little bit lower. If you have a lot of lawyers or engineers, that number is going to have to be higher. So 125, you're on the edge of going out of business. 150,000 to 200,000 is kind of healthy, and then if you're in the 200 to 250,000, you're making a lot of money. All right, you need to have the ability to process credit cards. In the VA world, it's called a P card or purchase card. It's minimally expensive, and the paperwork is a lot easier. So if you don't have the ability to take credit cards, once you start winning contracts, I highly recommend doing so. All right. Contracting officer diversity. They're just people. Some of them are below average. Some of them are seasoned professionals. Just remember that they are there to make the rules or apply the rules equally. So the whole purpose of the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, is to keep a level playing field. There's pros and cons to that, but for the most part, these people are making a great effort. Almost all of them are following the rules, so just keep in mind you're just dealing with a person. Protests, they always suck. I can tell you that from experience. We've protested a few times. They're always expensive, and sometimes even when you got an open shut case, you lose anyway. A technique that a lot of contracting officers or legal departments will use is if they did something wrong, they'll cancel the solicitation and just reissue it again. So that's again, I'm not saying don't protest. We have done it. You're just not going to have you're not going to have a positive outcome a lot of the time. It's a small world. So try to be professional and respectful, even when you lose. So today's enemy might be tomorrow's partner or friend. A lot of these VA contracting officers talk to each other, especially when you're in a very narrow market. If you're a specialized service, if you're kind of a pain in the butt, that word is going to get around. So make sure that you're good to your customers and to even your competitors. Bonding. As you do bigger projects, if you do any construction at all, I highly recommend that you start working on bonding now, well before you need it. It is painful and very expensive, but you got to have it when you do construction projects. And there's a lot of things that you would not think are construction are, whether it's installation of a laundry equipment or a fire alarm system. There's a lot of things that are classified as construction. Quick rule of thumb, take your cash, multiply by 10. That will be one of your limits for your bond. And then take your largest job, multiply by 2. Those are the 2 criteria a lot of bonding companies use for figuring what your bonding limit is. Your first threshold to bust through is $1 million, and then hitting the $2 to $5 million is your next challenge. So start talking to your insurance company now. If you're interested in a project at all, respond to the sources sought. A lot of people are lazy and they don't do it, but it is absolutely critical to leverage the rule of 2. if you are interested or you might be interested, say that you're respond to the sources sought, because if nothing else, it'll keep it in the SDV community. So definitely respond to sources sought. People are lazy and they end up going either small business or big business. Get a bank line of credit, even if you don't need one. Again, if you grow and are successful, you will have a cash crunch. The other benefit is that your line of credit counts as cash available for your bonding. So that's a second powerful reason to get a line of credit, even when you don't need one. Interested bidder list. Do you sign on and let everyone see that you're interested? The answer is sometimes yes and sometimes no, in my opinion. If you already have a partner, you're doing all the work yourself, you're not needing any subcontractors, then yes, maybe you stay off the list and don't let anyone know that you're bidding. If you do not have a partner, then consider putting yourself on the interested bidders list. Also, the contracting officers can see that you're on there. Davis-Bacon, that's the law that basically provides the minimum or prevailing wage that you have to pay in a market. It's expensive, it's a pain. But if you're bidding from out of town, you can also use it to level the playing field as far as cost goes, because you obviously have mobilization in hotels. So Davis-Bacon is not always bad. Okay, commercial trade shows, even the ones hosted by VIB and others. Most business is done not during the trade show. It's between 7 and 10 p.m. So make sure that you're prepared and make sure that you book your appointments well in advance to meet with decision makers. Okay, so we're going to get started now with our top 10 list. Again, I'm going to be motoring through this fast. Top 10 things contracting officers wish service-disabled, veteran-owned small businesses knew but are not allowed to tell them. Number one, all right, the Kingdom Ware decision is killing me. So if you take a look at this slide, you can see that right now to the right, as of 4 days ago, there was only 13,978 companies in the United States that are registered or verified as service disabled or veteran owned. Spread across all the businesses, all the states, that is absolutely tiny. You can see that from 6 months ago, that number has grown between 12 and 13%. So it is growing, but it is still, there's not enough service disabled companies. So KOs they're calling our company probably 3 to 6 times a week with different projects. Most of them have nothing to do with what we are interested in, so we decline. But they're going to the VetBiz registry, punching in an AICS code or a keyword search and seeing who pops up. So definitely get verified if you have not done so already. Right now, or as of 4 days ago, there were 33,400 contracts open on FBO. Find your niche, specialize, find partners, cultivate, and harvest. As I said, we tend to specialize. If you want a construction project where you need some brick laid or a room painted, HurtVet is not your company. Again, we look for what's funky, weird, hard to do. So anyway, I encourage you to specialize rather than being a generalist. All right, you'd be shocked to know how many solicitations received 0, 1, or 2 proposals. We probably win 5 to 10 contracts a year that we were the only bidder on. So sometimes there's a reason there's no bidders. The scope is terrible. The risk is high. It's poorly written. Sometimes you just need to walk away. And there are contracts that we walk away from all the time because the risk is too high. But a lot of times people just don't see them, know about them, or bid on them. Okay, I might not know what I'm buying, and there are some questions that I can't ask, but I will listen if you want to educate me. This is what I mean. You got to understand that the contracting officer is usually a middleman. You have the end user or the customer. And when I say customer, the contracting officer means his or her customer. It's the end user at the VA. They might be asking for some widget, some bell tower, or some X-ray scanner. And the contracting officer has no clue what the hell they're buying. So And sometimes even the person that's the end recipient has no idea what they're buying. So the scopes will be poorly written. They're asking for the wrong stuff. You'll see them spec out equipment that wasn't built for the last 10 years. So this is your opportunity to become a trusted advisor. This is a technique that we really use a lot. So what we'll do is we make smart buyers. We tell them the tips and the tricks of the trade. We tell them the dirty little secrets of our industry, things that our competition might do that HurtVet ethically won't do. So you all have competitors, I'm sure. You have good actors and you have bad actors. You have companies that go in low and then hammer their customers with change orders. Some of them might be legitimate and some of them might be questionable. So tattle on your competitors, tattle on your industry, open your books, show them that you are offering value. Sometimes the contracting officer, this happened again last week on a bid in California that we had. We walked through why our price where it was, the expenses that we had, and completely educated the buyer. We had a similar situation in New Orleans where the contracting officer, after our input, canceled the solicitation and completely rewrote the scope of work because there were so many loopholes for a less than honorable company to come in and screw over the company. It's bad for us because we don't win, and it's bad for the VA or whatever the government agency is. Another true life story. I can't go into a whole lot of detail because this project hasn't happened yet, but the VA in a location on the West Coast is about to do a sizable project, but they have budgeted for $4 to $5 million. And quite honestly, it probably is a $4 to $5 million project. We have a unique strategy to solve their problem for about $800,000. So we have been educating the VA customer and advising them of different options that they have, which will allow them to maybe modify the scope of work of the solicitation so that alternate proposals are will be considered. With respect to that, I strongly recommend that you offer alternate proposals, whether it be on price or Cadillacs versus Oldsmobiles, when you have the opportunity. I won't tell you the name of the incumbent or contract value unless you ask. So honestly, I don't understand why contracting officers don't share this more often. It acts as a deflationary tool that keeps prices down. It also allows for teaming opportunities. Excuse me. So if they don't tell you what the contract value is or who the incumbent is, ask. A lot of times they'll intentionally wait until after the solicitation closes, or they'll make you do a FOIA request. Again, I think it's cutting off their nose to spite their face. They would serve themselves by posting that information because you'll have less price creep over time. And it's all public information. They have to give it to you eventually, but probably 70% of the time they do not give it to you in a timely manner. I must and will follow the forest to the letter, but I may help you if I like you, or I may let you flounder if you're not very nice or screwed me over in the past. So let me give you another real life example. About a year and a half ago, we bid on a airport apron lighting project for the Coast Guard. We submitted our price, and for those of you that bid on lighting, I don't particularly like that industry because, as a general rule, on any bid, lighting suppliers will give you a price, and then 1 to 4 hours before the bid closes, they'll typically drop their price 20 to 50%. And in the case of a sealed bid, that doesn't do you any good because you sent your bid in the day before by FedEx. Common practice in the lighting business for some reason. So anyway, we submitted our price. We get a sizable price reduction. So I sent an email to the contracting officer saying, hey, we would like to drop our price by $12,000. We thought there was probably going to be 5 or 6 bidders, so it came down to price. The contracting officer wrote back and said, sorry, it's a sealed bid. If it's not in the envelope, we're not considering it. We cannot accept your email. Long story short, they opened the bids, and HurtVet was the only bidder. So in essence, the Coast Guard gave us a $12,000 gift, because if they had accepted that price, then we would have just cut 12 grand off the price needlessly. Number 6, my signature is on the contract too. You are a reflection on me. Don't make me look bad. What I'm trying to convey here is you want to try to mitigate the risk for that contracting officer or that buyer. Your proposal is an avenue to make them feel good about your company, your strategy, and your offering. So you want to convey to them in your proposal that you have the qualifications and the capabilities. You've done this work before. You have the experience and the expertise. You have the equipment and financial strength to perform this project. You are the conservative and safe choice. You offer them the best value at the lowest risk. That's the message you're trying to convey in your proposal. Also in any conversations that you have before the solicitation is released. Okay, number 7. You have no idea how busy I am and how much crap is on my desk. I'm overworked, understaffed. I don't have time to talk unless you bring me value. So on the phone, you need to get to the value proposition fast, and you need to be memorable. Everyone has made a call to someone, and you could just tell they were eager to get off the phone. Sometimes you have the ability to develop a rapport and make a connection. So if you find you're in a situation where the person is kind of a little edgy, make sure you're giving value. Make sure that you are conveying to them maybe the strengths and weaknesses of a scope of work or a statement of work, or again, share those industry secrets that you all have for your particular industry. Make sure that you have your capability statement and cut sheets available and quick. Make sure you're in the VetBiz registry. That's where 95% of the time they're going to go looking to see if there are 2 SDVOSBs that can fulfill their requirement. Again, you're going back to trusted advisor mode. Make sure, and I'll say this, when I say trusted advisor, people can really see through if you're not being legitimate and sincere. So a lot of times that means that you have to open yourself up and discuss shortcomings, your own flaws, problems within industry, explain how contractors put together their pricing. Why is it so expensive? So explain those things and you gain credibility very fast. All right. I like best value over low price too, but I get protested too much, and perhaps LPTA is mandatory at my command. So I personally am an advocate of best value. What that means is that the government doesn't necessarily have to go for low price. I like it because it does not tie the contracting officer's hands. If you have someone that's a penny cheaper, they may or may not be better than HurtVet. By the same token, if someone offers $70,000 on a $100,000 project, the government doesn't necessarily need to take that offer. So what I have found is that there you have low price and best value. The pendulum has swung. Initially, it was at low price. Then it swung over to best value. And now it's pretty much swung back to low price, technically acceptable. And so that technically acceptable can be a mechanism that KOs use to knock out certain competitors that they don't want. But low price tends to be the order of the day. And as I mentioned, best value tends to still be the low price 80 to 90% of the time. The one advantage about best value is it's not a sealed bid. You have a proposal. You can provide the ammo that a contracting officer needs to award you the contract. So show them you're the best value and LPTA, reduce their risk, make them feel good about using your company. I may or may not ask, but be prepared to explain how you'll meet your 50% self-performance requirement. If you go to FAR 52219-14, if you're a VSOB or SDVOSB, you need to be intimately familiar with this regulation. Basically, it says that if you are the winner of a service-disabled set-aside, if it is manufacturing or a service, you must supply 50% of the cost of labor. If it is a specialty trade, you must supply 25%. And if it is general construction, you must supply 15% of the cost of labor. This is a big deal. The fine for violating this is $500,000. So you need to take it seriously. So just marking up someone else's work, not showing up and doing nothing is not a good recipe. So sometimes contracting officers, when they're about to award to you or in the evaluation period, they'll say, hey, you're bidding on a asphalt paving contract and you don't have any asphalt paving equipment and no employees that lay asphalt. How are you going to do your 50%? So be prepared to explain how you're going to meet your self-performance requirements, and also be prepared to show them some spreadsheets on how you came up with your numbers. All right. If you file a protest against me, sometimes I'll get mad, sometimes I don't care. Some contracting officers view this as just a normal course of business and they don't take it personally. Sometimes they do take it personally, because what you're essentially saying is the scope of work was poorly written, or there was some, I won't say misconduct, but there was something that was not done properly. So that's why they take it personally. If you're constantly protesting, word will get out. So that's not to say that you should never do it. It's just, it's an uphill battle. We had one situation in Marion, Indiana. The scope of work basically mandated that we had to use one of our competitors as a subcontractor. Complete conflict of interest. It was open and shut case. The contracting officer just didn't see the problem with it. So long story short, we spent a lot of money, open and shut case, and we still didn't end up winning or having that modified. It's not my money, so I don't care how much it costs, but I do need to safeguard the government's money and be a good steward. So sometimes the contracting officers literally make you feel that every penny is coming out of their personal wallet. And other times it seems like they couldn't care about the price. If they're spending $50,000 for a $20,000 widget, they don't seem to care. So I'll give you a couple examples. We just finished a project recently, and it was somewhat of an emergency. They needed some specialty chemicals, or so they thought, very quickly. We ordered it. It was about $50,000, and then they found out later that they didn't need it, so they ended up throwing it away. We also had a situation with an Army Corps of Engineers project. It was about a shade under $700,000, and they went through their due diligence on our costing to make sure our pricing was fair and reasonable. I think it was because we were the only bidder, but I'm not sure. But literally on a $700,000 contract, they were questioning $200 for Gatorade for our crew so they could have something to drink. So sometimes they get into the weeds and you have to make a business decision as to whether you're going to open your books or not. It worked out for us. We ended up winning the contract. By the same token, there was a $465,000 contract in Omaha, Nebraska that we lost because we were the only bidder. They went through, looked at our books. I showed them everything. I showed them things that I wouldn't show my wife. And they still did not have enough evidence, they felt, to show that our pricing was fair and reasonable. So keep that in mind. The perspectives on money with the government will vary wildly. Number 12, change orders make me look stupid. So if there's a change order, more often than not, it means the scope of work was poorly written, or there was some unanticipated condition or event. In the latter case, if no one could have known, then that's not really a black eye for anybody. But as we all know, there are some companies that change orders are their business model. So they will bid 10 to 50% lower than everyone else in the market, and then their sole intent is to run up the bill to make their money. I honestly hope there's no one on this call that uses that as a model. Unfortunately, there's a very large percentage of companies that do. We do not. Sometimes we lose because our price is a little bit higher, but it does not tend to make for good relationships over the long term with contracting officers if you keep hammering them with change orders, because it does make them look bad, and it does kind of highlight that their scope of work was written poorly. All right, I can't talk to you during the quiet period. And what I mean by that is the quiet period is when the solicitation is released. So you can't informally chat with them, because whatever they discuss with you has to be discussed with everyone. They can talk to you before and afterward. So a lot of these mega companies and the Beltway bandits, they will work on contracts that haven't been released yet. They'll work on contracts that aren't coming out for 1 to 4 years. So they know it's called capture in that big market, where they are trying to capture business well before it hits the street. They're trying to shape the way scopes of work are written to give them advantage. You as a little guy can use that to your advantage, again, as a trusted advisor to talk to them before and shape how a scope of work is written to level the playing field if you're at disadvantage, or perhaps even give yourself some advantage by having things either added or deleted from the solicitation. Case in point, bonding. I'm not a big proponent of bonding. I think it's a waste of money. The government pays after they've received the product. It's essentially a 2 to 3% tax that just goes to sureties. I have had situations where I've explained that to to contracting officers. It was in a position when we couldn't bond as high as we can now, so it was in my best interest to have the bonding removed, and we were able to influence that and have it removed. So you can shape things before it comes out, and even in the source of salt period. But once it hits the street, it's the quiet start period begins. Know the bid rules. So what I mean by that is you have IFBs, invitation for bids, and you have RFBs, which is request for bid, or Ps, proposal rather. So one is a proposal, the other is a sealed bid. So for a sealed bid, you cannot put in clarifications and exceptions, and you absolutely must get it in on time. If FedEx or UPS does not get it there on time, then it doesn't matter. And as a sidebar, we personally have had both the Postal Service, FedEx, and UPS have service misses in the last 6 months on contracts worth several $1 million because they didn't get it there on time, either due to weather or to a aircraft mechanical. So my suggestion is try to, if you're going to overnight it, try to overnight it a day early. So we had a situation in Louisville where we were bidding on a project. It was a fire alarm project. I think our bid was $830,000. We were number one. We were the low bidder. And the next bid came in at about $860,000. The contracting officer called us and said she was not going to award to us because we had some clarifications in our proposal. We basically accepted that and didn't take the bid and did not remove the clarifications. The risk was so high on the project, the scope of work was written so poorly. But that's a classic example where we submitted with clarifications. We knew there was a high likelihood that it was going to get rejected, and it was. We have had the flip happen where we have had clarifications, and either they've asked us to remove them later and they accepted our bid and awarded to us, and in other cases they awarded to us anyway. I judge you by your subcontractors. What I mean by that is there's a grading system. It's called CPARS. And as a contractor, your contracting officers give you grades. So if you have a stinky subcontractor, your customer might realize it. They might know it's not your fault. It doesn't matter. Their grades flow to you. So there is no grading for subcontractors. So make sure you choose your subcontractors wisely. I have a very simple rule of thumb on how HurtVet chooses our subcontractors. And it's this. If I could drop a bag of my money on your kitchen table and come back 2 months later and it's still sitting there, I can do business with you. What I mean by that is if there has to be a position of trust, and it works both ways. So I've had situations where we've had contracts with subcontractors. They have, for reasons beyond their control, lost money, and we've sent them extra money. We've given performance bonuses to subcontractors. We do a lot of things above and beyond. The reason for that is if I ever get a bid from a subcontractor for, let's say, pick a number, $500,000, and I submit a price of $600,000, we win, and then I issue a contract to that sub, and he says, Keith, I really screwed this up. Our price isn't $500,000. Our cost is $900,000. I'm sorry. Well, you've just put me out of business. So I've got to have contractors that stand by their word, and I think we go above and beyond in taking care of the subs that work for us, and we have found that they're exceptionally loyal to us, and they tend to give us better pricing. We also pay fast. All right, don't ask dumb questions because then I think you're dumb. What I mean by that is if you call up a contracting officer and ask them a question and it's clearly written in the scope of work, but you just failed to read it, you thought you'd call first, bad move. So you are building that reputation, you're building that brand, that image in the contracting officer from the get-go. So make sure that you've done your part before you call up and stick your foot in your mouth, or make it crystal clear that you haven't done any federal contracting before, and they're going to have to handhold you through the process. Sorry about that, guys. I was a little eager with the clickage there. All right, so in conclusion, your action plan is don't be selfish. Think like a contracting officer. Try to solve their problems. And if you do that, the money will flow to you. People are inherently selfish. They think about what's in it for me, what's in it for me. When you build relationships with contracting officers, you need to put them first. And what you'll find is you'll build that trust, and they will call you and say, hey, I've got a problem. Can you help? So act as a trusted advisor. Look for partners now. Look for other service-disabled, better-known small business, or VSOBs. We currently work with 5 to 10 companies that are sometimes our competitors, and sometimes they work for us. So I encourage you to do the same. Don't be shy about approaching big businesses and asking them to partner with you, because most of these contracts, they're not eligible to bid on. I would guess more than 90% of all contracts come out for small business. So they are ineligible to bid. And especially in light of the Kingdomware decision, you're going to see a lot of contracts at the VA that are currently held by mega corporations that will flip over to service disabled. So it's a good way to position yourself early to start partnering with these big companies so that you can be a conduit for those big companies to keep the business they have. Number 3, specialize. Try to be different. Don't copy us and don't copy anyone else. Find your own place in the marketplace, and if you specialize, then it's easier to become a trusted advisor. Number 4, try to grow your business by 20%. Quite honestly, unless you're in you're only interested in doing business in your local market, I really don't see why anyone on this call could not grow their business by 20%. My company has grown between 200 and 400% for the last 3 or 4 years. That's not to brag. Don't take that the wrong way. It's just to emphasize the enormous opportunity that's available for you to really let your business explode. And once again, position yourself as a trusted advisor. Get contracting officers to call you, and that will be a wonderful position to be in. So at this point, I'm going to turn this back over to Cole.
All right. So we've got a bunch of questions. So we will go ahead and move through as many as we can. The first question, somebody had a question about your immediate success after you started your business. You mentioned that you had a contract shortly after you started. Somebody had a question about a requirement for being in business for 3 years, which isn't a requirement, but maybe you could talk a little bit more about how, as a startup business, do you kind of build a resume as you're putting together that best value proposal so that you can, even if your business is new, but you're an experienced business owner, how do you present that, or what are some tips you have along those lines?
Okay, very good question. So in my particular case, there was an incumbent that the Army Corps of Engineers hated. They were late, they were overpriced, they just hated it. So I'm guessing I was the only bidder, and so they kind of spoon-fed me. I had zero experience. It was fabricating 110-foot beams to be used at a dam. And so I leveraged the experience that I had. It was my day job at the time. We built stuff out of steel. And though my company didn't have the experience, I personally, Keith Wichmann, did have the experience. So another technique to use is, if you're partnering with other companies, use the past performance and the experience of your subcontractors. So if you, you're partnering with a tank builder and you want to sell tanks to the Army. Well, you have never built tanks, but BAE has. So you would leverage the past performance and the experience and the strategies of BAE. Sometimes the government won't accept this. They want to just look at the experiential resume of the prime, but more often than not, they will accept the subcontractor work. And then in my case, that first project that I bid on with, we bid it with Simplex Grinnell. The local branch manager was so desperate for business, he said, yeah, I'll partner with you. We didn't end up winning that contract. But then when I called on the second guy, I said, well, yeah, Simplex Grinnell, they'll partner with us. Why shouldn't you? So you need to leverage up. And as Cole said, it's not a requirement that you have a lot of experience, but it's certainly helpful. They do look at past performance. And next question.
Yeah, so somebody, looks like we have a manufacturer or product supplier. They're looking for insights on shipping costs. They say originally they used to be paid by the buyer. Now it's required to be paid by the seller. Just kind of bridging this to a more wider audience. How do you remain competitive when you're looking at projects? You know, if you're selling to the VA is countrywide. How do you remain competitive when you're not in your own backyard or when you have to bridge a wide geographic area?
Okay, very good question. So We have actually had some more success lately on the West Coast and in New Jersey, New York. So we're actually going into more expensive markets. So my company is based out of Mobile, Alabama. We have another office in Cleveland, and we're opening one in Seattle here the next week. So, but don't misunderstand, we are an absolutely tiny company. Our success of late has been we go into expensive markets, we have a lower cost of labor. Sometimes we can also take subcontractors from other markets and bring them in. We can overcome the cost of airline tickets, hotels, and rental cars. Case in point, the example I talked about earlier about spending 60 grand in a month. Well, that 60 grand I spent with service disabled competitors, they came out of North Carolina, they came out of Georgia, they came out of Ohio, because their cost was lower, and we could overcome the local market in California, whose rates were double and triple where they are in other parts of the United States. So I don't know if I completely answered that question. As far as shipping goes, I don't know what kind of product you guys sell. I tend to stay away from commodity items, whether it's anything that's a commodity, anything you can find on eBay or Amazon or whatever. And the reason for that is there's always a greater dummy who will sell it for a little bit less. And as I mentioned, I'm not interested in selling anything for 5, 10% profit, 15, because there's no money in it. Think of it this way: you have a company, or you have a product. It's $10,000. You sell it to the Air Force for $11,000. So you made $1,000. Woohoo! Free money. Well, what happens if it shows up late, or half of them show up broken, or they're flawed somehow, and now you got to spend another $10,000? So again, I don't believe in chasing anything that's a commodity, because you always find someone that will be dumb and give it away for free. Overall, the cost of shipping is, I think, relatively inexpensive. You can buy a tractor trailer and get it anywhere in the United States for anywhere from $1,500 to $5,000 with 40,000 pounds on it. So shipping is, I have found, not to be such a big factor.
Great. And again, that goes to, where is your competitive advantage? And maybe your competitive advantage is in teaming with your competitors. If they're closer or can do it for cheaper, but you might be able to provide a better proposal, then maybe that's the winning team, as opposed to going it alone or for more expensive. So we have a few. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just had one. I want to piggyback on that, Cole. I have had several situations where companies that could bid as prime contact us and say, please bid as prime, we'll be your sub. And the reason they do that is they don't want to deal with the nightmare of government paperwork, or they're not familiar with it. They just want to do what they do as their core business. So we've had that several times where large and small, usually it's small companies, say, hey, we're not really good at this federal contracting. You take care of the paperwork, we'll work for you. So think outside the box. Sometimes companies will be willing to do that.
We have a few questions. I'm going to lump them all together for the sake of time, but about capturing the work on FBO. Keith, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Feel free not to answer if it's one of your secrets to success for your own business, but do you use any sort of programs to help you filter through FBO postings, or do you literally just go through FBO, use the searches that you can build in there, or do you have some sort of outside program?
FBO is horrible. So actually, it's a great resource. It has absolutely everything on there. The problem is the search agents. We have our search agents set up. We do a lot of different things. HurtVet does. It's a rather eclectic mix. So we probably have 20 or 25 search agents. The problem with the search agents is the Boolean search that they use is very unreliable. So one of the things that we focus on is fire alarm. So every month or excuse me, every week, I would troll through 900 to 1,700 new solicitations that came out under this search for fire alarm. And it had several other search terms. But of the, let's say, 1,500 that would pop up in a week, there would be 30 maybe that were valid. The rest would be baloney sales to a prison or dry cleaning service to a military academy or something like that. The search terms had nothing to do with what we had entered. So it is painful. I'm sorry, I do not know of a shortcut on that. One hint is to figure out what your NAICS code is. Put the NAICS code in as one of the items. The problem with throwing in the kitchen sink is you'll get a lot of crap back too. So it's the key is to narrow it down as much as possible. But when you do that, you start missing a lot of stuff. Again, case in point, we're looking for fire alarms. Something doesn't pick up. We'll go to another search that might be related to I don't even know what. Arc flash studies, and then I'll find a fire alarm on there, and it wasn't under the fire alarm search, but it was under the arc flash search. So unfortunately, you just got to slog through it. We do pay for another service called GovWin. It's probably the most expensive one out there, and it costs between $3,000 and $7,000. It has most of the same information that FBO does. It actually has a little less because they don't put everything on. The only advantage it has is it gives you more information on who the incumbent is and what the last contract was for. Honestly, we don't use it as much as we maybe should. Is it worth $3,000 to $7,000? I don't know. We renewed this year, and I was kind of on the fence. If you win one contract, is it worth it? Yes. If there's not information that you gathered from that one source that allowed you to win that contract, it definitely wasn't worth it. But unfortunately, just keep, I don't have any great pearls of wisdom. Just keep looking at your search terms and figure out why you're getting the chaff that you're not looking for and keep refining.
Great. We are at an hour. Keith, I'm going to ask a favor if you're willing to stay on for 5 or 10 more minutes. I know you're a business owner. Your time is valuable. We still have a lot of people online, still have quite a few questions. I'd like to get through a couple more, but I know your time is valuable. So I will leave it in your hands if you're willing to sacrifice a few more minutes.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right, so we'll try and rapid fire these. We have a couple questions about your $125,000 of revenue per employee and your 20% margin and markup. If you can just kind of give everybody a sense of margin versus markup. Those terms always seem to get mixed up. And then your $125,000 revenue per employee, if you could just expound upon that briefly, but a little more detail maybe.
Okay. All right, so first of all this is Keith's opinion, okay? So don't take any of this as gospel. I have an opinion, and that's what this is. So first, let's touch on margin versus markup. So if a 20% margin is the same as a 25% markup. So markup, you take a, let's say it's $1, and you're marking it up 25%, so your new price is $1.25. A margin is what percentage is profit from the total price after you've already added what you're going to add to it. And is there a difference? Absolutely not. It's just how you think. A lot of larger corporations think in terms of margin. You just got to understand that a margin is going to be more money than a markup. So I tend to work in markup. I want to know how much money is going in my pocket. One of my estimators, he likes dealing in margin because that's what he did in his previous life. So a 20% way to calculate margin is a 20% margin. So that's take the number, let's say it's $1, and divide it by 0.8. And that will give you a 20% margin, and that would be $1.25. Oh, okay. So the 125. That is just Keith's rule of thumb. I have dabbled and been exposed to a lot of different companies and a lot of different industries, and that 120,000 to 125,000 is just Keith's rule of thumb. When I run across a company that is averaging about 115 to 120, I just get a pit in my stomach. Something bad is about to happen. Again, I caveat this: if you have a fleet of people making $8 an hour, that will skew it. By the same token, if you got really expensive people, um, you need more money. So just again, a rule of thumb: if you were to take a person's wage, but you're actually paying a person, let's say you're paying them $10 an hour. My rule of thumb for your actual hard cost is about a multiplier of 1.42 is the number I use. So if you take a person's wage, multiply by 1.42, that's really kind of what your cost is going to be to have that person. So if you want to make money off someone's labor, and as business owners, that's what we want to do. There's no shame in that. You need to take someone's wage and multiply it by 2 or 3 to get to a labor rate that gives you a shot at making any money. And in some cases, depending on the cost of the job, it needs to be higher. So that's what I meant by that 125 number. It's just Keith's rule of thumb. Most companies, if you do search on, local companies in your area, sometimes you can find the information in the Chamber of Commerce. Take the number of, take revenue divided by employees. You'll find most healthy businesses are going to be in that 150,000 per employee to 200,000.
Great. And again, to specify, it's going to vary on industry. If you are selling commodities, that number might be skewed one way or the other. Your industry does matter. So we've got questions coming in about that. I just want to specify that this is, like Keith said, this is his rule of thumb that he sees in his general industry. So we have a few questions about source of SOP, pre-solicitations, rule of 2. I'm just going to quickly do a summary on this. A sources sought is a contracting officer's market research. They are trying to find out if they set it aside SDVOSB, are they going to get enough proposals submitted to actually give them justification for that set aside. So that is what a source of sought is. A pre-solicitation, the determination has already been made what set aside they want to use. But there's no actual contract in a pre-solicitation. It's just an announcement that a contract will likely be forthcoming, assuming that they still have the money and they still have the requirement. And then once the solicitation is posted, that's when Keith started talking about sealed bids, RFPs. There's varying different forms solicitations can come in depending on the requirements of the contract and what the contracting officer is ultimately trying to win with or receive with their contract. Let me see here. We have another question. One of the questions is you emphasize teaming with larger businesses. Can you talk about the relationships and any sort of terms that you think are good for a smaller business to team up with a larger, as you call them, mega corporations in those instances? How do you safeguard yourself against somebody that's, they have their own legal departments?
Okay, good point. So, first of all, they're more scared of you than you are scared of them. And I've heard so many stories from large companies where they've been burned by a service disabled or a hub zone or a woman owned or Indian owned, in that they did all the work and never got paid. So you need to make them feel comfortable with you, that you're not a charlatan, shyster, or thief. So there's 2 avenues to do this. All these companies will have a federal guy or gal that handles their federal business. And then you also have the local branch office. So my suggestion is to find an opportunity that they can't bid on. And then we've done it both ways. Most of the federal guys, honestly, you would think that they would be very eager. It's free money for them that makes them look good. We have problems with, we'll send out 10 solicitations, say, hey, we want to bid on this, and then we'll get answers on 3, and 2 of those will be 2 weeks after the bid closed. So you can try that. It's going to take a long time to build relationship with them, and you will probably have to dislodge someone that already has a relationship with them, and you're going to have to make them feel comfortable. And that might mean hopping on a plane and visiting somebody. And I know as a startup, it really is hard to incur that expense, but HurtVet in the last 60 days crafted some large relationship with very large companies. And I did it by hopping on a plane. I flew to New Jersey. I suited up, did a presentation to some CEOs and VPs, and took them out to dinner and made them feel good that we weren't there for free, easy money, and we weren't going to screw them over. The same holds true for today. I'm in Chicago. I just left the National Acquisition Center for the Department of Veteran Affairs. I scheduled a meeting with them, and I sat with 3 decision makers for an hour. It costs money to do that. It costs time. Sometimes you need to make that commitment. Sometimes it pays off, and sometimes it doesn't. But getting back to the large corporations, go to the local branch manager and say, hey, I've got this project to test for Legionella at the VA hospital in Abilene. Go to them. If they can't bid on it, they're probably going to partner. And then you go leverage that. So, for example, I don't even know who you partner with that, but let's just say you partnered with Acme Labs on that. Then you go to the next project and say, hey, I partnered with your sister company, Acme Labs. You want to do a deal over here. So you keep leveraging up and building those relationships. The other thing you can do, pay your subcontractors fast. You don't want them calling the contracting officer and squealing about them not getting paid. So those are the things that you do. Also show that you're not a pajamas guy, that you're going to help with the proposal writing. You're going to help with the execution. You're going to help by having a project manager or a technician show up, that you're going to actively participate with the project. That's how you build relationships.
Great. All right, we're spilling over again in time. It seems like we have a few more questions that are related to the subcontracting requirements. So just to review for everybody, for general non-construction contracts, you as the prime contract holder must self-perform 50% of the contract. For general construction, it is 15% you must self-perform. And for specialty trade construction, such as, electrical, HVAC, those specialty trade works, it is 25%. So can you just talk through how I know you mentioned spreadsheets and things like that, helping show the contracting officer that you do meet those requirements, but maybe you can expand upon that on how you go through when you're looking at a solicitation to understand if you have the capability to meet that percentage requirement?
Okay, so I do want to point one nuance out. Hopefully everyone who's listening to this is not just going to be bidding on VA. You should be bidding on all sorts of different projects. Some of those will be small business. So everything that Cole said is true about the percentages. The one thing that I want to amplify is that if a project is non-VA, well, I shouldn't even say that. If it's not a set-aside, it's not service disabled set-aside, if it's just small business, if the contract value is less than $150,000, then you don't have any self-performance requirements. This is for just general small business. Could be Army Corps, Navy, Air Force, no requirement. If it's over 150, and it's small business, you have self-performance requirements. That's identical ones that Cole just reviewed. If it is a VA or it is a set-aside for service disabled, then the self-performance requirement applies always, even if it's lower than $150,000. So how do you do that? Well, if you are a plumber in Topeka and you're doing plumbing, then it's not an issue. You're doing everything. If you are teaming and partnering, then the key is to actively participate. And I hear everyone's minds racing. Well, I'm doing the bid, I'm doing the paperwork, that's 50% or 25% or whatever. That's not going to fly. So in our case, I have one project manager right now. It's on the road driving to Seattle. I have another guy that just flew back from San Francisco. We will embed our team with the subcontractor. So I'll send technicians or project managers to embed in their team. So we're actively participating. It also helps with the customer relations. It also helps you generate a lot more work because most service disabled companies are not showing up at all. So when we do actually show up and the HurtVet golf shirt is there, and you have a cup of coffee with your end customer, and he or she says, well, you know what? We got that over there. It's broken. Can you fix that? Or, hey, we got this other contract that's coming up, and those guys really suck. Would you like to bid on that? Happens all the time. Quite honestly, that's why we're expanding our footprint across the United States right now, is because customers have said, hey, we've got more business. Showing up is 80% of it. So that's been our strategy. And then just document in the bid phases where we start, you figure out what percentage. So right now, and again, I don't want to bore people with the technical details of it, but the law is actually changing. And let me just stop. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving legal advice. Again, this is just Keith's opinion. So the law is changing. The new rules that are coming out basically said that the 50% or the 25% will be on dollar value of the contract. And what that means is if you win a $100,000 contract, you can only subcontract $50,000 of it. The current rules are a little bit different, and that is you have to do the calculation based on the cost of labor. So you have to contribute, let's say, 25% of the cost of labor. And this is what I mean by cost of labor. So let's say you're teamed up with General Electric on some project, and their bill out rate is $100 an hour, but they're only paying their guy $25 an hour plus benefits. So let's say with benefits, it's 35 bucks. So your calculation is based on the $35. It's cost of labor with benefits, not what they're charging you. So that helps a little bit, but it is still an uphill battle to meet your self-performance, especially when you team with these large companies that have big rates and big compensation packages for their employees. So you are probably paying your people less than those guys are receiving. But that's how we're doing the calculation. We're figuring out the cost of labor, what are the man hours for a project, and doing our percentage, and that's how we're coming up with our self-performance calculation.
Great. Well, Keith, I'm sure we could pick your brain for another 2 or 3 hours. I know we have unanswered questions, but as a business owner, I truly appreciate you volunteering your time. I know your time is valuable and that your schedule is busy. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up right there. To everybody who's still online, we still have quite a few people, quite a few unanswered questions, but hopefully you will join us for future training sessions where we can address those. Also, this presentation will be available. Everyone will get an email once it is posted. And so if there's anything you missed or anything you want to go back to, it will be available by Thursday, I believe. So with that, we will go ahead and conclude. Again, thank you, Keith, very much for your time. It is very greatly appreciated. So,
thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you for joining us, everyone.